This is Red Eyes Creations Radio. My name is Henrik, and I want to thank you for listening to our program and paying attention to the kind of topics that we are focusing on in these interesting times, shall we say, as we break some new ground and discover fascinating things about what is going on this planet. Our website is redeyescreations.com. We are growing every day, and I want to thank everyone for your kind emails and the positive feedback we're getting. We read all our email, and we do our best to reply to as much of it as we can. On our website, you can follow along in our frequently updated news, listen to our radio program, watch our webcasts that we just started, by the way, really groundbreaking stuff, and see some of our video interviews, our short films, or listen to some of our extended radio programs that we have available for you on our website. And today we have David Livingstone with us. He is the author of Terrorism and the Illuminati, a 3,000-year history, and also The Dying God, the hidden history of Western civilization. And David have two different websites that you can take a look at. That are accompanying these books. The website is thedyinggod.com, and the other one you can take a look at is terrorism-illuminati.com. And there's a lot of information up there for you on those websites, so you can further explore some of the areas that David touches upon. And I don't know personally that much about David. I've read a few of his articles, and I think he offers a really interesting perspective, and I want to kind of explore a bit some of his areas here today and talk more about where he's coming from, so to speak. So I'm very grateful to have you on the line here today, David. Thank you very much for coming on.
And thanks for inviting me.
So, I mean, tell us a little bit about yourself, some of the background. I want to kind of hear a little bit about how you kind of first got involved in some of the in researching some of these areas, David.
I think the easiest way to explain it is that I guess it was about 20 years ago exactly that I was in a university program called Liberal Arts College, and I've since learned that this was an attempt to preach the Hegelian version of history, which is a novel approach and one that's been generally abandoned in education. And so we focused on a history text by The History of Western Civilization by William H. McNeill, who was a professor at the University of Chicago. His mentor was, I can't remember his mentor's name, but his mentor was the one who was responsible for inviting Leo Strauss to the University of Chicago. So this book is, probably the clearest outline of the propaganda version of history that you could come across. And this was the kind of nonsense that they were trying to impose upon me. A funny experience I had too is that at the time, even though I didn't understand, I wasn't educated enough to understand what was happening, what the effort was, but I was challenging my professor, and she said to me, because I said, the problem is I don't always agree with you. She says, well, we want to see that you've learned something. And this is a great lesson. This is obviously that I wasn't allowed to challenge this view. I was there to accept it.
Yes.
And the basic where my research started was this might seem like a remote point, but it's really the underlying issue that helped me discover everything that I've discovered and everything that I reveal in my two books, and really understanding the whole mystery of what we're being subjected to. And there was a reference to the sudden emergence of the Indo-Europeans from the Caucasus Mountains between a period of approximately 2,000 to 500 BC. So when I read this, it sounded really odd. It didn't make any sense. You look at any other civilization, they emerge slowly over time by people settling down in certain areas like Mesopotamia or Egypt, and they turn to agriculture, which allows them to develop civilizations. Whereas the Indo-Europeans do the opposite, and they begin violently. So they emerge out of the Caucasus, and which is nonsensical. It's like expecting people to just suddenly emerge from the Alps. I mean,
Right.
how do people come out of mountains and then supposedly conquer and subjugate the advanced civilizations of the time?
Right.
So it didn't make any sense. It was weird. It sounded mythical. So I just started researching it, and little by little, I eventually discovered what was this notion of these Indo-Europeans was actually a euphemism for the Aryan race, and I eventually discovered that the idea of an Aryan race was a Masonic idea or an occult idea. So then I went on to find out, well, what is this occult religion? How does it have so much impact on history? And that's when it gets convoluted, because the occult versions of history are very elaborate. So if you read, there's plenty of material as well. I mean, there's lots of books where you can discover the occult versions of history, and they kind of closely mirror mainstream versions of history. But of course, the ideas that are discussed in the occult are never referred to in mainstream versions of history. So how do you study it, right?
Right.
How do you just study the veracity of these claims? When they say that Pythagoras was a godfather of the occult tradition, and he preached so and so, such and such and such and such. How do you check that? And so it becomes very interesting, because you get into this kind of no man's land of history, of this kind of bridge between mainstream and occult mythology. But it's where the answers are, because the version of history that we're being taught is it's a whitewashed version of occult history. So it's the occult history without actually ever referring to the occult. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
And this is the point, is that this is the modern propaganda. Basically, we can go back to approximately 250 years since this version of history is being imposed, basically since the Enlightenment, but more particularly since Hegel. It's a completely novel way of interpreting history, a complete rewrite of history, but it's been so entrenched that today there's no memory of any other perception of history.
Right.
What they are trying to teach us is they're trying to teach us history as really their secret plan, but their secret and the progress of their secret plan, and teaching it to us as if it's just the natural and spontaneous intellectual evolution of humanity.
Right. So,
yeah.
I just want to ask you. So, I mean, when you were taking this course, this class you were talking about, did you just feel that something was wrong in the way that they explained history in that regard, or did you at that point already had some kind of alternate version that you relied on to get your information, so to speak?
No, I didn't have an alternate version yet. I just had a sneaking. It wasn't even a sneaking suspicion. It was just a very basic intuition. That
right.
This is bogus or fishy at least. So I started to dig, and it's only recently that I've discovered. And now I'm very suspicious about this place, because no, really, I mean, they deliberately used the Owl of Minerva as the mascot of this place. And if anybody wants to look it up, it's the Liberal Arts College of Concordia University. The Owl of Minerva, of course, is a very important symbol, and a very important occult symbol, and it was obliquely referred to by Hegel. And that's the reason why they use the mascot by that school, because it was referred to by Hegel. And it has a long history, the owl symbolism. But so that made it very, very fishy indeed.
Okay.
Oh yeah, the point I wanted to make is that is that when the Illuminati was originally founded, one of the first grades of the Illuminati was the Minerval grades, or the grades of Minerva, which were considered for, I believe they were set up for young people to kind of begin their entry into Illuminati indoctrination. So interesting that they would use that, to basically create a Minerval college.
Yes. So I mean, I want to also kind of back out a little bit and again talk about this big perspective and if you will kind of paint a picture for us. You've begun doing so already, obviously, but more of who is in control of the world today. I mean, we can approach this from different areas. We can talk about some of the different groups that you've been primarily studying, or some of the different agendas that are out there. But where do you think is a good place to begin? Let's say you're talking to a novice in this subject, so to speak. I mean, for instance, you put the title of Illuminati on your book, of course, and if we begin there, are you specifically referring to like the order of perfectibilists that Weishaupt set up in Bavaria, or are you using this term, as many researchers do now, as a broad term to kind of explain a larger group or an agenda?
Yeah, I use it as a broad term because, like as I said, as I started to discover this occult version of history, I sought out to find out its origin, and I wanted to be very accurate in what I discovered. I wanted to discover it for its definite origins, and what of course everybody knows that the occult is based on Kabbalah, and but Kabbalists claim that it originates originally from Babylon, or they say it originates from Moses or the fallen angels before the flood, so on and so forth. So there's various claims about the antiquity of the Kabbalah. Mm-hmm. But what I've determined is that it emerged in the 6th century BC. So when I say Illuminati, I'm talking about a secret occult doctrine which has been preserved and pushed forward, which accompanies an agenda that's been pushed forward since the 6th century BC. So of course the Illuminati was created in the 18th century, so it has to be used in a broader sense to refer to this group or secret organization which has been around for a very long time.
Yes. The Kabbalists, let's begin there. What do you think? Where do you think that this originates from? You're mentioning Babylon and way back. Or are we talking about the Hebrews or a Zionist faction here? What do you think, David?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, what happens is in the 6th century BC, when the Jews were taken into Babylon, basically. There's argument about how many, but supposedly nearly the entire population, or at least the best and the brightest of the population, were taken to Babylon in captivity. And what happened is that this was a huge catastrophe for the Jewish people because they had already been placed in the Promised Land according to their own scriptures. So their settlement in the Promised Land was understood as a binding agreement between themselves and God. So when they became severed from the land of Zion, essentially, it forced them to reinterpret the meaning of their relationship with God. It was supposed to have been understood as a punishment because of their paganism through the years, but instead, it seems that a number of them chose to not see it as a punishment, but only as a temporary upheaval. And what they did is they rationalized their paganism. To make a long story short, essentially, it was a bastardization of the Jewish doctrine and incorporated elements of Babylonian magic and astrology. And that's pretty much what the Kabbalah is.
And do you think that's I don't know what kind of connotation you put on that, but do you think that that's in some way, shall we say, evil? Does that imply that they're in cahoots with the Dark Lords, as it were. What's your take on that?
Absolutely. This is where you get into the issue of the dying god, because throughout the ancient Middle East, ancient peoples used to worship this deity called many different names. So the Egyptians worshipped him as Osiris, the Greeks as Dionysus or Apollo, the Babylonians as Bel or Marduk, and the Canaanites as Baal. So this was a god who was believed to, first of all, I should say that he was a god who was identified with the sun. He was also one of a trinity. So the father was the first god, and the father had a daughter, and the father mates with the daughter and produces a son. Then the son marries this goddess. So the son is at the same time the son of the goddess as well as as his spouse.
Right.
So these two gods essentially are viewed as one, and they're equated to, she's Venus and he's the sun, but they're basically interchangeable as a kind of a dual aspects of a single androgynous god. So because this god is identified with the sun, he's believed to die every year during winter when the days get shorter, because it's nature worship. So it's tied to fertility. It's a fertility cult in a sense. So it's believed that this god is tied to the fertility of the land. So the crops die in the winter, they revive in the spring. And it's effectively tied to a mating between the god and the goddess, which produces the offspring or the return of the fertility of the land. And so when the god dies, he's believed to go to the underworld. And in the underworld, he is the ruler of the souls of the dead. Now, what this means is this is not souls of the dead, but this is the mistaken identity of what are really disembodied spirits, or what we call today ghosts or ghouls or whatever. So essentially, he is the ruler of demons or spirits or whatever you want to call them. But in ancient times, these disembodied spirits were believed to be the souls of departed beings, departed humans, just as much as today's ghosts continue to be believed as being souls of dead people caught in some kind of a intermediate stage of existence.
Right.
So essentially, he becomes identified with evil. The Greeks called it Pluto, and the underworld was called Hades. This is just their equivalent of the same belief that was held throughout the ancient Middle East. And so in ancient times, it was believed that good and evil were two. It's a dualistic belief. So evil was not considered to be a breach of good, but an equal and opposite force to good. So if the good God requires rites of worship and rituals and sacrifices, then the evil God also requires rites and rituals and sacrifices to appease him, because he's a god as well. So while the good God requires good sacrifices, the evil God requires evil sacrifices. And the worst sacrifice you could make, the most evil sacrifice you could make, is the slaughter of a human child. So this becomes the basis of this ancient cult of the dying god, and you'll find this all over the place. All over the Middle East, it's consistent. And this is why, in reading the Bible, you'll find that when the Jews, the first thing they do is when they leave Egypt, they're supposed to worship God as a truly transcendent being, and to reject the paganism that they had witnessed or been introduced to. But as soon as they cross the Red Sea, the first thing they do is, while Moses is on Mount Sinai receiving the tablets of the Ten Commandments, they build a golden calf.
Right.
Now this golden calf is recognized by scholars as being the Apis bull of the Egyptians, which is basically an incarnation of Osiris. So in other words, a dying god who's consistently identified with some kind of horned creature, usually a goat or a bull in that time period. And so that's the first instance of their worship of this type of god. Then they're punished for this. They go into, they eventually make their way to Palestine, and there, when after they conquer that land, they're told repeatedly in the Bible, first of all, not to intermarry with those people, but most importantly, not to adopt the religious practices of the Canaanite people, who worship the same dying god and goddess, but under the names of Baal and Astarte, or Ishtar as she was known to the Babylonians, or Athena as she's known to the Greeks. So they're told not to, but despite that, they do. And this paganism becomes so entrenched in that early Jewish civilization that the temple itself becomes a place of worship for these two pagan gods. That it's, you know, I would believe that if you were able to transplant yourself to ancient Israel, that you would not find Judaism, except maybe under, you know, a very, very small minority of you know, strict adherents or reformers. But the population itself basically had adopted a pagan cult that made them indistinguishable from the rest of the pagan peoples of that time, which is why they were known as Phoenicians and described as practiced circumcision, but the ancient world made no distinction as to their religious practices. And so most importantly, the Jews are sacrificing their children to Molech. And Molech, again, is just a derivation of the dying god, and just another name for Saturn. In fact, more specifically, Molech is, I said Saturn already because I'm I'm thinking ahead of myself. What I meant is a incarnation of Baal. He is Saturn because Saturn is understood esoterically as being the opposite of the sun. Saturn is the nocturnal sun. So Saturn is a dark aspect of the sun. So black magic rituals are dedicated to Saturn. So throughout the Bible, you get this is the complaint that God has against the Jewish people, is that they're practicing astrology, their witchcraft, things like divination, channeling, spirit channeling, and worst of all, human sacrifice. And of course, you know, to go back, actually, we should go back to what these rituals really involved. This is what the worship of the golden calf involved, was what the Bible refers to as pagan revelry. And what this means essentially is an orgy, and which is still to this day what these rituals are about, as the movie Eyes Wide Shut was trying to let you in on.
Right.
Well, because throughout the ancient Middle East, you'll find that this is how the worship consistently took place. Is that first there was some kind of intoxicant that was taken. I guess it depended on which part of the world you lived in. So the Greeks had wine, and I guess probably the Egyptians had beer. Different, or you know, maybe some other kind of intoxicant. And the intoxicant was to kind of help the worshiper lose their morals in a sense, to make a simple point, because that's essentially what it was. And then it was accompanied by music, and the music helped then this intoxicated devotee to become excited in a sense, or what the Greeks called enthusiasmos, or being in the god. Essentially, it riled them to a heightened state of whatever you call it, and essentially where they believed, I guess, they would become possessed by the god. And this kind of irrational exuberance, I didn't mean to make that connection.
Right.
Anyway, so they, in this state, then they were able to do things like kill a child and rip it apart and eat its flesh, or cook it and then eat it, which is what took place. And of course, the music was not only there to excite the worshippers, but also to drown out the cries of the dying child. And these rituals were usually followed by orgies. Most importantly, the sacred marriage, which was a ritual sex between a priest and a priestess who impersonated the god and the goddess. And out of this mating was supposed to produce a son of God who was basically a living incarnation of the dying god. Understand that, then you understand the entire basis of the occult belief system, and this idea explains everything. If we have time to go through it, explains the basis of everything, of the entire process of so-called Western history.
But very interesting. I want to see if we can tie this together in some way to this idea of the bloodlines. I think you mentioned previously about the Luciferian, the Luciferian bloodlines and the royal bloodlines. We can go into that, of course, as well. But would you say that this was something then that was? I mean, I personally have always tried to figure out where, what the origins of the royal bloodlines is. Where did they actually come from day one, and what separated them from the other people in that particular region? Have you been able to track this back in any way, and where do you think that this leads to?
Yes, I have. In fact, I thought I had covered every question that I could have in my first book, and I was truly shocked to discover the amount of information that I discovered from my second book. And that's the Dying God, correct? My second book is the Terrorism and the Illuminati.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
And things that I have never seen referred to anywhere, even in occult books, but I was able to discover only by following the bloodlines. And following the bloodlines would usually identify certain important characters through history, because they always become a focus of intermarriage or a reconnecting of lost veins in this bloodline. And so it helped me to identify certain people through history. And then so when I would see this name recur all the time, let's say a person that I had never heard of before, I never even heard mentioned before by anyone or any book or history book, and I would look it up and find out that yes, they had a very pivotal role, usually in the occult, in mainstream history as well, but usually with some very important occult connection, and it often helped explain some of the things that were going on. But to get back to the point is that the dying god, as I said, was known as Venus. The original Latin name for Venus is Lucifer.
Yes.
So I guess you probably understood my point, is that the worship of the dying god, going all the way back, was the worship of darkness, or the worship of Lucifer. What happens is that in Babylon, instead of recognizing that this exile is a punishment, this captivity is a punishment for their paganism, for the 800 years before that, they instead rationalize it, and then they create the Kabbalah as a disguise, as an attempt to amalgamate or to disguise their pagan worship with Jewish themes, so that this worship of the dying god, Lucifer, is hidden in what's called an interpretation, and that interpretation is known as Kabbalah. So from that point in the 6th century BC is where you have the beginnings of this formalized worship of Lucifer, in a sense.
I was seeing that I've seen that Lucifer, obviously, translated means light. I've always think that this is about the worship of light, and again, even Venus as that kind of a rebel planet, basically breaking away, as it were, and also the idea then that's why they call themselves the Illuminati, the illuminated ones, and the idea of the Enlightenment. And would you say that all these things are connected then in that way?
Well, yeah, absolutely, very much. The idea is the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is the source of Gnosticism. So Gnosticism is a reversal of the Bible. So Gnosticism interprets the Bible in reverse. So the God, the creator of the universe, is then considered evil, and the devil is considered good. So the good God imposed a number of moral restrictions on us, whereas the evil God showed us the supposed light, quote unquote, light. And that light is liberty. So the devil taught us freedom. He taught us freedom from God. He taught us freedom from morals. And as simple as that sounds, that's as simple as it is. That's what they believe. They believe that moral restrictions are just conventions invented by human beings and are completely unnecessary, because they believe that life, so they reject God, so they believe that life is survival of the fittest.
David, what do you think? Because one thing that puzzles me here is the idea that if freedom is the thing that is kind of venerated, so to speak, then it becomes difficult to understand why ritualistic behavior, for instance, like if we talk about child sacrifice or what have you, that seems to be a very binding and obligating thing, and seems to be kind of contradictory to the idea of freedom and to do whatever it is that you want to do. Is that can you figure that out in a way? It's very difficult to understand the logic behind it in a way. What do you think?
Because you have to understand that human sacrifice, the sacrifice of a human child is the most evil act you can make, right? So that's the point. It's a process of emancipation in their eyes, because if you accept then, first of all, that God is evil, or that there is no God, which is basically the same concept, and that therefore there are no morals. There is no such thing as right and wrong. All that matters is Nietzsche's will to power. All that matters is the advancement of yourself above others. And you are entitled to do whatever it is that you want to or can to achieve the advancement of your own power. Not only that, but you should seek out to do what is otherwise considered evil as a way of demonstrating or actualizing this belief. And that's the point. So, many Gnostics...
So that should help you to kind of break you free from the moral structures and things like that?
It's demonstrating your freedom from morals, from God.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's demonstrating, it's showing your ability to do what others would consider evil. It's demonstrating your ability to refute. The most important, the best. There's a movie which was deliberately, I guess, marketed to explain this point, and that's Apocalypse Now.
Oh, really? Tell us more about it.
Yeah. Because it took me a long time to understand exactly what that movie was trying to say. But if you listen very carefully, Colonel Kurtz basically is supposedly evil. He's evil in the minds of the rest of the world. But the Martin Sheen character discovers that there's a little bit more to it than that. That yes, he's gone too far, but he's discovered something. And what he says is that when he was leading his troops, or whatever, his platoon back into they inoculated children in a Vietnamese village. They went away, and when they came back, the Viet Cong had chopped off the arms of all these children, and they were there in a pile. And he said that in that moment he wasn't horrified, but it hit him like a diamond bullet piercing his skull. And what did he realize? He said, the genius in that. And what he meant is that he realized the ability to not be constrained by the limitations of what people believe is moral, but recognizing what will accomplish your ends, and being able to do whatever it is, to do acts which are considered otherwise horribly evil, but to recognize that they're necessary to do, and having what they understand as the moral strength to be able to do that. That's the whole point.
And that really also tells you something about the human mentality then, because in a way, really to be truly free in that sense, you would actually have to do nothing. But again, if you have to resort to acts of extreme violence in order to feel freedom, if you will, that really tells you how perverted the mindset and the morals of that particular person is, obviously. But, you know.
Absolutely.
Yes.
You know, see, the thing is that movie culture has caricaturized the idea of evil to the point where a lot of people don't even believe there's such a thing as evil because it's so ridiculed. But that's not what real. That's what evil is.
It's in the human.
It's a rejection of good. Absolutely. And so, you know, that explains 9/11. Right?
Give me a bit more on that.
Kissinger is a fan of Machiavelli. So is what's his name? The supposed leader of the neoconservative movement.
Leo Strauss?
No, not him. The current one. What's his name? Who wrote his PhD dissertation was on Machiavelli, and he's trying to revive that. He's trying to revive Machiavelli, and it's at the end of my book. For some ways, like it's my mind, and so that's the point, right? It's the ends justify the means.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So if it means having to sacrifice several thousand of your own citizens, but if it provides you with a pretext to advance this supposedly good cause,
right,
then it must be done. And they pride themselves in their ability to do these acts of evil because they think that it proves their strength.
And as far as I've been able to figure out as well, because you mentioned Hegel a little bit in the beginning here, and it's that idea that they've observed, you know, a little bit of what actually goes on in nature. Because again, we do have these cycles in nature. We have life and death. We have these opposites that actually are, in the true sense, as I see it right now, that they are creating life on this planet, if you will. I mean, we must have winter in order to have summer. We must have actually death to have life in a way. But what I've seen is that they've adopted this philosophy and applied it to human civilization in that regard, you know, to their civilization, that they think that they need to do A and B in order to get C, their desired results. Would you say that that's a correct assertion?
It's an interesting point. It's never occurred to me before. I'd have to think about it.
Okay, right.
It's an interesting concept, yeah.
Right.
But you know, the good is such a simple idea. You know, it's so easy. We've been indoctrinated in this idea that we've had several philosophers who have attempted to achieve the truth, and that it's supposedly convoluted and requires, you know, tomes of convoluted, you know, terminologies and logic, but it doesn't. That's in fact, most of those philosophers were occult theologians. The truth is very, 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 very simple. It's just to believe in equality, to believe, to do unto others. Then that's it. It's not much more complicated than that.
Right. I want to return a little bit again
and their belief is the opposite.
Okay, gotcha. I want to return a little bit, David, to the idea of the bloodlines again, the royal bloodlines, and tie it back and just ask you again there, if you've been able to find like the origins of the royal bloodlines, and if so, what group of people were they? Do you think?
Okay, well, what I've been able to find is, first I'll tell you the belief, and then I'll tell you the actuality, or what I've been able to identify as real.
Okay.
The belief is that they are descended from the fallen angels. So they believe, if you read the Bible, it says that the sons of God descended to earth and interbred with human beings to produce the Anakim, who were giants. But if you read the apocryphal works like the Book of Enoch, it explains that these sons of God were actually fallen angels. So Lucifer and his followers, and that when they descended to earth, they interbred with the female descendants of Cain, and to them they taught magic. So supposedly the origin of the Kabbalah is from the fallen angels who taught it to the human descendants of Cain prior to the flood. And according to the book, anyway, I don't want to complicate the story, but essentially these Anakim, some of them survived the flood. So when the Jews are commanded to conquer the land of Canaan, what happens there is they get frightened because they see the sons of Anak are there, who are giants, as Belial was a giant. So this is a reference to the idea that the Canaanites essentially represent descendants of the Anakim, or the human half-breeds, supposedly divine half-breeds of fallen angels and humans.
Yes.
So this is very important because, first of all, it's from the Canaanites that the Jews adopt the worship of the dying God and these occult practices of human sacrifice and orgiastic rituals and so on and so forth. And the Bible states very clearly that every time it says that it warns the Jews not to, I'm not supposed to say Jews because at this time there is no Jews, they are Israelites. But anyway, some people like to make that minor point. I don't think it's much of an issue, but I have to say it. Right. Just so I don't appear like I'm misinformed. But so every time the Bible says don't worship the gods of the Canaanites, it also says don't intermarry with them. And yet, almost every single major person in the Bible is of Canaanite blood or marries a Canaanite. Most of the kings, like David and Solomon and was it Judah and Tamar, I guess. So anyway, that's where I get fuzzy. But you'll find that throughout. So basically, the line of Davidic kings in the Bible, from whom the Messiah is supposed to come from, have been intermarried with Canaanites. So in a sense, because the point of Kabbalah is to bring about the rule of the Messiah, who is a descendant of the Son of God. So under the understanding of the Kabbalah, the Messiah is a descendant of David, but also of the fallen angels and Lucifer through the Canaanites.
So are you saying that like Christ and the Antichrist is from the same line then, or what are you saying here?
What I'm saying is what they think.
Oh, yeah, I got that. But do you think that their ideology then is that Antichrist, or and Christ will come from the same line, from the same bloodline?
They don't believe in Christ. They believe the Messiah is still to come, who in a sense is the Antichrist, and this is why the intermarriage has to be so carefully monitored, because it has to preserve this so-called divine blood, which is basically Luciferian blood.
Right.
And they have to do this because they have to preserve this purity throughout history to produce eventually the Messiah.
Right.
And this is where you get dynasties and royalty and nonsense like that.
And the obsession by keeping that line, so to speak, and keeping track of the genealogy, and don't bring any other genes, if you will, or blood then into that particular line, correct?
Exactly. It has to be pure Aryan blood, which is understood to be divine Luciferian blood.
And, okay, so what you've explained there is what they believe. What do you believe then about this?
Oh, gosh, where do you want me to start? It's the Antichrist.
Do you think that there is some element of truth in this, or is that total bunk? Do they make this up in order to prop themselves up to create a story here, or what do you think?
Well, my personal conviction is I'm a Muslim, so I believe it's likely true. There's a verse in the Quran that implies that the devil was permitted to interbreed with human beings, and this is a notion that's been around for years, that disembodied spirits can produce offspring with human beings. In the Middle Ages, they were called succubi or incubi.
Right.
And Rosemary's Baby is very much that idea as well, right? They hold a ritual, and the devil comes and impregnates a woman to produce the Antichrist.
Right.
But in in occult ritual, this takes place. This is called a sacred marriage. In fact, this is a very important. This is the central point of the Da Vinci Code, and he says what he calls a hieros gamos, because he accurately calls it that because it's an ancient occult ritual of sacred marriage, and the story is important because the woman Sophie, which is another important occult name.
Yes.
She stumbles on her grandfather in the midst of an occult sexual rite of sacred marriage, which we are to understand from Dan Brown is that's supposed to be the true Christianity, which is utter nonsense. And but that sacred ritual is to continue the bloodline, right? And it's the priest and priestess impersonate the god and goddess. What's supposed to happen is that the priest is supposed to in that ritual is supposedly possessed by the god. So the child is actually the child of Lucifer. And this is how they continue the bloodline, so that these kings and queens are just living embodiments of the purest incarnations of this bloodline.
So I mean, we can work ourselves up here a little bit, so to speak, into the more modern era. What is going on now, and I want to ask you a little bit about the Rothschilds and what is known as the Grail bloodline. We have about 5 minutes left in this segment before we can take a break and continue. But we can begin maybe to talk a little bit about the Rothschilds and what I guess you would refer to as the Grail bloodline. Does that carry on from that tradition that you just talked about in regards to the Dan Brown kind of mythology that they're building up right now? What do you think?
Absolutely. It's the Holy Grail is the mythology of this bloodline. And it helps to explain the whole basis of it. And what I discovered is that while they claim to come from, Nimrod, from the fallen angels, Egyptian kings, and so on and so forth, what I did find is that the bloodlines focus back, they can all be traced back to Herod the Great. And that's the real key.
Okay.
Do you know who Herod the Great was?
Yeah, give us a little bit of background on him, if you will, for our listeners.
Well, basically, he was part of a family who were Edomites, and the Edomites were they were actually descended so they weren't really Jewish. They were descendants of Esau, the Jews were descended from Isaac, whereas the Edomites were descended from Isaac's brother, Esau, who took the name Edom because he was red. And so King Herod was a member of a family of Edomites who had converted to Judaism. So there was a bit of resentment against their rule because they weren't considered real Jews. But King Herod was the one, when the Magi came to him and told him that they had witnessed the birth of the Messiah, he orders the slaughter of the innocents, which is basically a euphemism for child sacrifice, again, except this time on a mass scale. And he orders the slaughter of all the firstborn sons, but Mary and Joseph escaped to Egypt, and Jesus eventually survives. And that's a very important point. So he's the evil king of the Bible who tries to eliminate Jesus. Right.
So the Rothschilds, do you think, basically ties back to King Herod then? Is that what you're saying here?
Well, just considered Red Shield.
Yes.
I'm being vague right now because we only have a few minutes left, but there's a lot to talk about.
I understand. Yes. Yeah. Well, why don't we take a break at this point? Then we can continue talking more in our member section. But I do want to give out some of your details. Of course, I want you to mention both of your websites again, and I also want to give you an opportunity to mention where people can go if they want to pick up copies of your either one or both of your books. Where would they go to do that?
My first book, The Dying God, The Hidden History of Western Civilization, is at thedyinggod.com. And my more recent book, Terrorism and the Illuminati, is at www.terrorism-illuminati.com. There's also a PDF version of my book available for free on the site, and the entire book can be read on the site as well.
Very good. So there's a lot of information up there, and do check it out in case you want a physical version of that, of course. And you have links to where people can get the book?
Yes, I do. Yeah, you can buy it at Amazon as well. Yeah.
Very good. Okay, well, thank you very much for this segment here, David. Stay with us. We'll take a short break and we'll continue in a little while.
Thank you very much.
It's criminal. There ought to be a law. A criminal. It ought to be a...
All right, welcome Red Eyes members. We are talking with David Livingstone about his terrorism and the Illuminati, and also the dying god. We just left off talking, or getting into rather, this interesting story about the Rothschilds and their bloodline and their potential connection then to King Herod. And what we can say, of course, is that we know about the story about the red shield that I think it was Moses Amschel Bauer who hanged this over his door in his Frankfurt shop, and this was later picked up by his son, Meyer Amschel, and he took the name of Rothschild. But David, you were just talking about the red shield, and are you saying that there's a connection here to the red shield and to King Herod? Is that correct?
There's a connection to Edom, which means red. So the Edomites.
Edomites, gotcha.
So, yeah. I could tell you. I could give you the full story if you'd like. That would incorporate all the elements.
Yes, please. Yeah, it was very interesting hearing about that and what the connection is there. Yes.
Well, I'm going to give you the full picture, and I'll probably lose a lot of people on a lot of minor points. But I think it's important people get at least the gist. Because if they do, they can start to identify what the important points are, and they can always learn more about it later.
Well, of course, absolutely. I think most people will be able to follow along. But yeah, please give us the story.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have to go back to the birth of Kabbalah in Babylon, and this is a very hotly contested issue in scholarship. Scholars have different opinions about when specifically it originated and what the influences were. But I've identified it as emerging in Babylon in the 6th century BC. And the reason is because it coincides with the emergence of astrology, which becomes intertwined with Kabbalistic thought. And astrology has been proven to have emerged in the 6th century in Babylon. There's no doubt about it. And it was a practice that was ascribed to the Chaldean Magi. And this has caused a lot of confusion, even among scholars of the subject. Because the Chaldean Magi were supposedly priests of Zoroastrianism.
Right.
But when we study the beliefs of these magi, they have nothing to do with true Zoroastrianism. And the way we can study them is usually from references to them in many Greek historians and some Roman period historians. And the beliefs that they ascribe to them are completely different. So, scholars have had various claims about, maybe that these guys were nuts and they were inventing everything they were saying.
Right.
But it's true. So there's only one man who understood the whole picture, and I believe, in my opinion, he was the greatest scholar of the 20th century. His name was Frans Cumont, a Belgian scholar. Mm-hmm. And unlike scholars today who concentrate on a specific field, he was an expert in many. So he was an expert in ancient Greek history, but he was also an expert in Middle Eastern history, in Hellenistic history, and all the periods that were required to have the broader scope to understand this period. And what he pointed out is that these magi were heretical Zoroastrianists. Have you heard of Zoroastrianism? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, definitely. This is one of the first solar cults in the Persian-Iranian region, right?
That's right. So also emerged approximately in the 6th century BC.
Yes.
But it's a very different cult from what was ascribed to these Chaldean magi. So the one place where you will find the beliefs identical to those ascribed to the magi is among the Kabbalists who emerged a couple of hundred centuries later. The beliefs were identical. It's the beliefs of the heretical Zoroastrianism basically involved the worship of a dying god, and the same occult rituals that we've been talking about, and that combined with various astrological and other magical beliefs. So the key to understanding what obviously was the case is that these magi were actually the first Kabbalists who were misidentified as being Persians or Babylonians. But they were heretical Jews who invented the Kabbalah in Babylon. The ancient world did not know about Jews for another 100 years. Even Herodotus, who wrote in the 5th century BC, described them as Phoenicians and claimed that they practiced circumcision. So Jews were not known to the world at that time. So what happened is that when Cyrus conquers Babylon, he releases the Jews and allows them to return to Palestine. So they leave Babylon. It's at this point that you find the spread of this Kabbalistic cult all over the place. An important place where it penetrates is in Egypt, where it evolves into what's known as Hermeticism. But most importantly, it's exported to Greece, where it's known as philosophy, or two words which means love of knowledge, but knowledge being Sophia. Again, we have that wonderful word again.
Yes.
So this is a point Hegel tried to dismiss the Persian and Iranian or Zoroastrian, Babylonian, Egyptian origins of Greek thought. And it's since his time that we have been regarding the Greeks as the birthplace of Western civilization,
right,
and viewing them in isolation. But up until his time, it was always understood that the Greeks were students of the Egyptians and Babylonians and Persians.
Right.
And in fact, this was very much a theme of the Renaissance, and who were trying to reclaim what they categorized as the ancient wisdom, the Perseologia. And but it's clear there's numerous accounts that point to the fact that the earliest Greek philosophers borrowed from the Persians, from the Chaldean Magi. So while the Kabbalah was initially developed in Babylon, it was elaborated upon in Greece. And I regard Plato, in fact, I'm not the only one, but Kabbalists have ever since regarded Plato as as one of the great forefathers of Kabbalistic thought.
Really?
Yes. This is common strain. And the reason they do so is because they regard him as having in turn derived his doctrines from the Kabbalists. So they believe that there's no contradiction in that. And it's true. It's easily proven that Plato and Pythagoras in particular, that all their doctrines were originally derived from the Chaldean Magi. So this explains that when Alexander conquered the Middle East, and he caused the spread of Hellenic ideas to the Middle East, particularly philosophical ideas. So basically, he caused the spread of this Greco-Judeo Kabbalistic cult to many parts of the world, particularly at the city of Alexandria in Egypt, which became the hub of occult thought in that period. And this is what has confused scholars, is because they call it syncretism, meaning that several different creeds and religions produced hybrids, new hybrids.
Yes.
But the truth is that it was only one single underlying occult doctrine, which had several manifestations, which were all interrelated. I think the mistake is by separating them and understanding them as they're supposed to be separate. They're not. They're just branches of the same Kabbalistic school.
Okay.
And the different branches are Neoplatonism, which basically is the continued elaboration of the thought of Plato. Then there's Hermeticism, which I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, and then of course Gnosticism. So and Kabbalah on its own. So Neoplatonism is not a branch of philosophy as we understand it on its own, but it's the theology of the Kabbalah. Hermeticism is what's called practical Kabbalah, or more specifically, alchemy.
Right, like you can have expressions of that can be even architecture and things like this, right?
Yes, of course. It's had a continuing presence. It's almost at the heart of it all along.
Yes.
So and then if you have you have the theology, you have the practical Kabbalah, which is magic, and then you have the actual rituals, and the rituals were dying god rituals, and there are many versions of these that were practiced at that time. The most important of them was Mithraism, and Mithraism was a cult which was believed by the ancients to have been developed by the Chaldean Magi. There is no relationship whatsoever between Mithraism and Zoroastrianism. This is what has confused scholars, despite the fact that these Mithraic Magi claim that these doctrines came from Zoroaster. What they did have is they had a pseudo-Zoroaster. They had their own occult version of Zoroaster in the same way that Gnostics have their own occult version of Jesus, like Dan Brown's Jesus. And they put occult doctrine in his mouth when they never derived from him. So what essentially Mithraism was the amalgamation of the worship of the dying god to an ancient Persian deity called Mithras. And that's how they create. So the cult is the same as the dying god worship that was being practiced throughout the Middle East, except in this case, the name applied to him was Mithras. Now, what's interesting is that Heraclitus, who was a Greek philosopher in the 6th century BC, I believe, he's the one who said that the worship of Dionysus were in imminent imitation of the rites of the Chaldeans. Now, the rites of Dionysus were, or Bacchus, took place where women used to go up into the hills. They would get drunk and dance and make music, and they would tear a bull to pieces and eat its flesh. Now, the bull is, in some cases, it was actually a human being sacrificed. So you see this repetition of the same exact ritual that I described earlier.
Okay.
And Heraclitus says that this was borrowed from the Magi. So again, no relation to Zoroastrianism. And the worship of Dionysus was the basis of a cult of Orphism, or attributed to Orpheus, a teacher known as Orpheus in ancient Greece.
Yes.
And Orphism was the basic philosophy of Pythagoras, who through him was transmitted to Plato. And according to several ancient Jewish historians, the teacher of Orpheus was Musaeus, who was supposedly Jewish. And this, I'm referring to the one I remember specifically is Aristobulus. Aristobulus was a 3rd century Jewish historian who claimed that Musaeus was the teacher of Orpheus, and that Musaeus / Moses was Jewish.
Okay, right.
So, back to Herod. Herod receives a visit from the Magi, announcing to him that they believe that the Messiah is born. And why? So he tries to preempt that by committing the slaughter of the innocents, and it fails. Jesus survives anyway, and goes on to preach an orthodox reform of the Jewish religion, which is a return to the original teachings of Moses, and exempt of the pagan traditions, of the Talmudic traditions that had been accreted to it by his time. So because they failed, I believe what happened is that they tried to kill him instead. Again, Islamic doctrine is that they failed to kill him.
Mm-hmm.
But they tried to kill him as a form of human sacrifice. Because in occult ritual, when you kill a victim so that he takes your sins. And they do a ritual called the laying on of hands when after you kill a victim. And this laying on of hands is in effect the rite that is done to transmit your sins on to the sacrificial victim.
Right.
So here in that, precisely the doctrine which was taught by Paul. Paul is in complete and utter contradiction to the teachings that were attributed to Jesus by everyone else, particularly Matthew.
Mm-hmm.
Herod, there's a very interesting article online by Robert Eisenman, who's one of the leading scholars of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And he points out some very fascinating, I say pretty compelling evidence that suggests that Paul was an agent of the house of Herod.
Right.
So Paul, in essence, was usurping Christianity because he was opposed by the other apostles, right? He started preaching that, first of all, there was no need to adhere to the traditional practices of Jewish law, particularly circumcision. So he's recalled back to the apostles in Jerusalem who argue with him and tell him, what the heck are you teaching? And they eventually, send him away. Despite that, Paul continues to grow his following in other parts of the world, and eventually his version of Christianity overtakes the one that's preached by the original apostles. And this is a version, basically an occult version. And another important point is that the Valentinians, who were the most powerful, most important Gnostic sect of his time, claimed to have received their doctrines from Paul. And it's obvious that Paul's doctrines are Gnostic, more particularly that he taught an esoteric version of the death of Christ, particularly as a human sacrifice to receive our sins. And of course, this continues to be accepted as doctrine, but there was an esoteric understanding of it that presumably he would have taught the people who he had initiated to higher levels of his following or something like that. But essentially that was Herod's version of probably why they continue to, essentially worship Jesus as Gnostics, because they understand that Jesus was their sacrificial victim who died for their sins.
So, okay, yeah, because this is something that came up when when you're talking about the dying God, there couldn't be a more, at least in that sense, than modern version of that than the Jesus Christ of the Bible in that sense. So
exactly, in the Catholic Church.
Yes,
and more particularly Gnosticism.
Right, and again, there's been many researchers who have, if you will, pointed out and discovered that the Roman Catholic Church very much has its roots in I guess we can call it then the pagan world in that sense,
Kabbalistic tradition.
Right. Okay, so you're saying that what we have then today is just a carrying on of the same old story, right?
Absolutely. And see, this is where it becomes important, is that it seems the house of Herod was part of a network of 4 specifically 4 families, including what's called the Julia Claudio dynasty of Egypt, of Rome, that produced a line of 5 emperors that succeeded Caesar. So from Augustus to Nero. And in this case, particularly Caligula, who was involved with this network. It's true.
Right.
And so the other one was a family of a town called Emesa in Syria. And this is a family of priest kings who worshipped Elagabalus, or Baal. And this town was ruled by hereditary priests of Baal, also known as Sol Invictus. Sol Invictus is an alternate name for Mithras. The 4th family is the ruling family of Commagene in Turkey. Commagene is the first place where there is definite evidence of the worship of Mithras. And so these 4 families were obviously involved in the creation of Mithraism. Because there's arguments as to what is the true origin of Mithraism. Most scholars today will argue that it was a creation of the 1st century AD that falsely attributed itself to the Magi, but was entirely invented in Roman times, which is largely true. But as we said, we know, as I explained, that the Magi were already the developers of Kabbalah, so it's not entirely accurate.
Okay.
So this network of families created Mithraism, and it's out of this network of families that you get the Holy Grail families.
Okay. And you tie this together also with the Rothschild dynasty then, I guess.
The Rothschild dynasty is a bit of a mystery, but it's the key person, according to people like Dan Brown, and Dan Brown, basically all he did was fictionalize a book called The Holy Blood, Holy Grail. And this book claims that there is secretly an occult underground which claims descent from the Merovingian kings of France.
Yes.
And that these Merovingians were supposedly secret descendants of Jesus through Mary Magdalene. And the person that this bloodline is transmitted into European aristocracy is Guillaume de Gaulle, or William of Gaulle, who's the subject of several prominent romances. And he supposedly, according to the legends that are being circulated in the cult, was the son of a Jewish exilarch named Makir. Because supposedly there was a split. The exilarchs were traditional rulers of the Jewish communities in the Middle East, who were continued to be headquartered in Baghdad, actually, which was near Babylon. But in Persian society and then in Islamic society, the Jews were allowed to govern themselves within their own communities, but subject ultimately to the authority of the Islamic State. So they were appointing their own rulers called exilarchs who had to be able to trace their descent back to David. So they were a Davidic line.
Yeah.
And there was a split at some point. And out of this split, the one who failed to push his claim for succession to the role of exilarch was banished to, quote unquote, the West. And the claim is that he went to France, and there he intermarried with the. In fact, according to this is mentioned in a couple of Kabbalistic books from the 13th or 14th centuries, which claim that he essentially intermarried or held relations with the family of Charlemagne. Oh. And I would understand that this is the reason why Charlemagne is the most important figure. Essentially, he marks the birth of Europe.
Yes.
So what I followed is the bloodlines that I followed is that after this intermarriage between these 4 families, they break off into 2 different branches. And one important branch, where did they go? It goes in some important direction. Anyway, Right, of course. One important branch continues. They produce a line of Roman emperors, because what's important is that this Julia-Claudio dynasty were the ones who attempted to try to make sun worship the official religion of the Roman Empire.
Which it is.
This is right. It's Kabbalah. This is Babylonian. This is the Babylonian cult, right? Mm-hmm. Where the emperor or / king is the incarnation through sacred ritual of the sun god.
Right.
So this is what they were trying to institute secretly, but they failed to do that. But their descendants, through this network, produced a line of Roman emperors who repeatedly tried to impose the worship of Sol Invictus on the Roman Empire, mm-hmm. like Marcus Aurelius. They never fully managed to do so, but they eventually do in Constantine, who essentially finally succeeds in the plot of Herod in replacing Christianity with the worship of Mithras / Sol Invictus. And they do by making Catholicism the official version of Christianity.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then, so these two branches of this family continue to be separated until they're finally reunited in the Saint Arnulf, Bishop of Metz, I think, something like that, who is, I can't remember his precise relation. He's something like the great-great-grandfather of Charlemagne.
Okay. And so now Charlemagne, then his descendants intermarry with supposedly this family of the Exilarch. And the most important person at this point is of this reconnection of these various strings is Guillaume de Calonne. And this is the point of Da Vinci Code and the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, is that this is the entry point of this so-called Davidic and Jewish bloodline into European aristocracy. And this is the point where it becomes sacred. Okay, I see. And this is, this has been carried on in that sense. I mean, I think that the recent, incarnation, if you will, of this now is a guy called Pierre Plantard. Have you heard of him?
Right, exactly. That's the claim.
Yes.
There are several, but they're, as scholars have pointed out, is that almost all European aristocracy can trace their descent to Charlemagne.
Right.
Like he's kind of like the beginning point of these European bloodlines. But there's something else very, very intriguing that I discovered. And what happens is that this bloodline becomes Eleanor of Aquitaine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who marries Henry, would it be Henry I of England, who become the Plantagenet dynasty of England.
Mm-hmm.
More importantly, they're related to the Scottish family, the Scottish royalty. And Scottish royalty begins with, in this story, begins with Malcolm III of Scotland, who marries Agatha of Bulgaria. And this is very intriguing. Because this is where we get into the point of the lost tribes. And this is very important. And it also gets back to the point of the Edomites and explains the significance of the Edomites. The lost tribes, supposedly, the Assyrians, the Syrians carried out their conquest of the early Israelites in two stages, because the Israelites were divided into two kingdoms: the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah, a smaller kingdom composed of the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, and the kingdom of Israel comprised of the remaining 10 tribes. The first conquest took place about 100 years before the second, when the kingdom of Israel was conquered by the Israelites, and they were taken and relocated to Medea, which is, I believe, northern Iran.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Among the Medes, another important.
Yes, a very interesting group. Yes.
Right. And then from that point on, they're supposedly lost. This is kind of the modern term that's applied to it, but for many years they were never considered lost. Their location was always known. they were known to have, as I said, spread into northern Iran, and most importantly, into Armenia. And from Armenia into southern Russia. And in southern Russia, which was the land of the Scythians. This is very important. At the time, ancient authors described the Scythians as being red-haired and green-eyed. And so this is where, according, we're going to get into familiar territory maybe. The Prose Eddas claim that Odin came from Scythia.
Okay, really?
Yes. And in fact, genealogical studies have now discovered that there's a link, there's a specific genetic marker which can be traced to Central Asia, specifically the one identified with red hair.
Yes, there is a relationship, you're saying here, between the northern races and the Scythians or the Scythians, yes.
Exactly, the Scythians, and then so this red hair can be traced almost entirely in Scotland, in parts of Scandinavia, in parts of Central Asia, like places like northern Pakistan and Afghanistan, and among Jews, where it's most common.
Okay.
So the Scythians eventually, several centuries later, convert to Judaism, and they're known now as Khazars.
Khazars, okay.
And what happens is that I guess it's the Rus who conquer the Khazars and basically eliminate their kingdom, and these remnants of the Khazars then migrate into several parts of Europe. And they produce the aristocratic families of Hungary and Poland and Bulgaria.
Okay, so we come around the circle there again, and then you're saying, so that with this marriage between the Hungarian princess, was it, and I forgot what you mentioned. What king was it again we were talking about?
Malcolm III of Scotland.
There you go. Okay, so it's these two branches, so to speak, then are coming together again. Is that what you're saying here?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the person who goes to fetch Agatha, because she's actually partly what is she? She's partly British, but her mother was a Eastern European princess. There's a bit of controversy in this. So there's various claims of this or that, but that's essentially the point. And the person who goes to fetch her back from Bulgaria is the first William Sinclair.
Okay, really?
The Sinclairs are the family of the Holy Grail. The Sinclair, right? Sinclair, Plantal, same family. This is what the Da Vinci Code is trying to tell us.
Right.
And that she discovers at the end of the book that she is a Sinclair, because the Sinclairs are the hereditary guardians of Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland.
Right.
And so this is where you get this bloodline. You get this bloodline being a mix of of this dynasty from Malcolm III and the Sinclairs, which produce numerous families like the Bruces, the Campbells, the Kennedys, the Douglases, all these families. What's Diana's family, the Spencers, and so on and so forth.
So you're saying that these guys are all over the place right now, then?
Oh well, they are the aristocracy.
Right, yeah. But it isn't specifically like, this line specifically within the Sinclairs now, then, because the Sinclairs, as you say, then are related to all these other families which have the same, which is of the same original bloodline, correct?
There's degrees of purity, right?
Right.
It's a managed bloodline.
Yeah.
So you gotta imagine each person as being like a test tube, right? So in this continuing experiment, you keep having these, it keeps having to branch off into degrading levels of purity, but you always have, the specific leading individuals who represent the purest, formulations of it.
And would you say that this is on their level still to this day a kind of experiment, because they haven't been able to birth this child, this as they would see as the Messiah? Then.
I don't. No, because it's all in time. I don't think it's an experiment.
Right.
I was shocked by the degree of organization that I saw in the way that these bloodlines are maintained. Mm-hmm. Shocked. Mm-hmm. There's patterns to it.
Can you take an example?
Well, it mostly takes place in the women, and you'll see that I haven't certified this absolutely, but from what I discovered is that there's every few generations, approximately every fourth generation, so the bloodline would branch off and then come back after about the fourth generation. Okay. And often the woman would retake the name, and so the woman's name would somehow represent, like she would retake the name of the woman of the fourth generation before that, and things like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Bizarre things.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, would you say that? Give me a second. I lost my point there. Yeah. Okay. I remember it again. Who do you think is overseeing this? Because this must be an incredible, difficult kind of thing to root out and scope out, and someone must be up there and to try to keep track on all this, right?
I can only assume Lucifer is looking over it.
Really?
Yeah.
And he lives for several hundred years, forever? What's the score here?
Well, that's the point. Is according to Islamic doctrine, that the devil is not a fallen angel. He is a species of being that existed before human beings did, and they're essentially disembodied beings. They're produced of a different kind of composition than human beings. These beings have been witnessed throughout history and still do to this day. And this is what the occultists claim to do: is channel these people or possess them or bring them forth. Pictures of ghosts have been captured on film and so on and so forth.
Sure.
And so what happens is that when the human being is created, he refuses to honor him. So God immediately casts him out. But the devil begs for respite, and it's granted to him. So God basically allows the devil to prove to God that the human being is worthless. But essentially, it serves the purpose of providing the trial necessary for us to prove our devotion to God. We're an exceptional creature because we have free will.
Sorry to interrupt, but you're saying that in that case that Lucifer serves a higher purpose, that he's still a pawn in the game of God, then, in a way, right?
Absolutely, because we have free will, which there's no, we will be the beings who will choose to love God, right? Not being created to love God, but to be able to choose, we have to have an option, an alternative, and a challenge, and Lucifer provides that challenge. So what he's doing is essentially he's trying to prove on a grand scale our worthlessness, and he's doing so by inducing us to create our own prison, which will be a worldwide dictatorship. So it'll be the ultimate humiliation of us creating our own
enslavement,
our own enslavement, our own demise,
right.
Of creating the opposite of justice, the opposite of those rules which were originally revealed to the Jewish people,
and
the Ten Commandments.
Would you say that what's Lucifer's plan in regards to the bloodline? He's still interested in creating the Antichrist then from this bloodline in order to help him in his agenda, or what's his part in this?
I don't know, but it seems to be the case, and it's his family. I believe that's why they say the Father. When the pseudo-Christians say the Father, I believe they're Gnostically, secretly speaking, referring to Lucifer, their father, as opposed to God. God.
All right. Hey, listen, I want to talk a little bit about. I mean, there's so many things we can go from here, obviously, and there's so much to talk about. We've kind of very much talked about the overarching picture here, so to speak. But one thing I saw in chapter 14, I think, of your book, you have something called the Palladian Rite. Tell us a little bit about that, if you will. I find that term interesting, that has popped up in a few different contexts here lately. But tell us about the Palladian Rite and what it is.
Palladian Rite was supposedly, now there's a lot of controversy about this Palladian Rite because it was revealed by Leo Taxil, who supposedly recanted after, but it doesn't make any sense. He must have been forced to recant because it aligns too well with too many other.
Tell our listeners briefly about Leo Taxil, if you will.
I don't really. I couldn't really.
Okay. Well, I can put up a link to Leo Taxil so people can find out more about it. Okay, but carry on.
Yeah. There's plenty of great stuff on Wikipedia on Leo Taxil.
Yeah.
But it's more. Let's go back to the point of the Palladian Rite. The reason I mention it is because the Palladian Rite identifies 4 people as the leaders, and that would be Albert Pike, Lord Palmerston, of the Prime Minister of England. What's his name? Bismarck. And Giuseppe Mazzini.
Okay, yeah.
And these people have an undoubted connection to the occult, especially Albert Pike.
Right.
And who was it that revealed, what's his name? The Canadian author of Pawns in the Game. Fantastic book, which unfortunately is lacking in notes or references.
Yes, I have the name of him on my tongue. I'm going to search for it quickly here. I think I'll think of it. Yes, okay.
And so apparently Albert Pike wrote a letter that outlined a plan for 3 world wars.
William Guy Carr.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the three world wars were supposed to be a first one against the Soviet Union, the third one against, they basically would create the Nazis. And then the third one would be between the Muslims and the Zionists. And this is interesting because Lord Palmerston was this is revealed in a book by Robert Dreyfus called Hostage to Khomeini. Lord Palmerston, who was supposedly a partner with Pike in the Palladian Rite, was part of what's called the Oxford Movement. And the Oxford Movement, I'll get back to that maybe, created a plot to spread Scottish Rite Freemasonry to the Middle East. Participating in this plot was Edward Bulwer Lytton. Edward Bulwer Lytton was the leader of the English Rosicrucians. And the man who was their agent was a guy named Jamal Uddin al-Afghani, who was a notorious imposter, but notorious if you knew what he was up to. He's still very well regarded in many Islamic circles. He created what's called the Salafi reform movement of Islam, but he was actually also the Grand Master of the Egyptian Freemasons. And the Salafi movement morphed into the Muslim Brotherhood, of which bin Laden is a member. And there's too many points to follow. The English Rosicrucians grew out of the Golden Rosicrucians, who were basically an offshoot of the Asiatic Brethren. The claim in the occult is that when the Templars were in the Holy Land, they came into contact with the Sabians or Ismailis, because the Ismailis derived their doctrines from the Sabians. The Ismailis, of which the Aga Khan today is the modern representative and leader, were a Gnostic version of Christianity. So basically, they amalgamated Kabbalah with Islam. So this is how the Templars supposedly derived their Kabbalistic doctrines. And one of the first people that they go to visit when they come back to Europe is David of Scotland, the son of Malcolm III. And they established themselves supposedly at Rosslyn Chapel, and that's how, you get the significance of Rosslyn Chapel.
Right, okay.
Another important point is that the Templars, there's only a single family with whom they intermarry. Sorry about that. There's another family with whom they intermarry when they establish themselves in Palestine. The only people that they intermarry with, non-Europeans, which is an aristocratic family from Armenia.
Okay.
So again, we have the significance of Armenia. Armenia was also the birthplace of Mithraism.
Okay.
Or the House of Comagene. And they reproduce a very important bloodline called the House of Lusignan. And the House of Lusignan, it'll be too much to get into. There's just so many interesting threads.
Right.
Really?
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you spell? Do you know how you spell Lusignan?
Lusignan.
And thanks. Okay, I'll have to check up on that later on then and find some more about that.
They basically become one with the Hospitallers.
Okay, really. So so let's.
And then, of course, the Knights of Malta.
I understand it. That's known to be that's the same order basically today. I mean, you can go into Wikipedia and see all these different branches of the same order. We're talking about the Knights Templar basically.
And why they are important is that they represent another important offshoot of this bloodline.
Okay.
And this bloodline re-enters to reunite with the lost bloodline of the Plantagenets to conclude the War of the Roses.
Okay.
I can't remember what her name is. She ends up being tried for a witch, of course. But it concludes the War of the Roses. The reason they're referred to as the Rose, there's two branches of the Plantagenets, the White Rose of York and the White Rose of Lancashire. The rose is a 5-petaled rose.
Yeah.
In other words, like the pentagram. The rose is a Kabbalistic symbol. The Zohar, which is the great book of the modern Kabbalistic tradition, begins with an exposition of the significance of the rose and the lily, which is referred to in the Song of Solomon as the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys. And it explains that the rose is the symbol, the rose and the lily are the symbol of the Jewish congregation.
Okay.
So that's the significance.
And this, the word of the rose is basically the
these bloodlines.
Yes, and the aftermath of that is, of course, that creates the Tudor line, and
exactly.
Basically you have the merger of the Lancaster rose and the York rose or York line at that point.
Exactly. And out of that, you have his daughter reigns Elizabeth. And I just wrote an article on that. And who was an occult princess? Her advisor was John Dee,
right,
who was the godfather of the Rosicrucian movement. And what's important here is that Elizabeth doesn't have an heir, so she's succeeded by James I. So now you have the Stuart bloodline descended from Malcolm III, along with some Sinclair infiltration, that finally comes to power in England. And this significance is not missed by the occult underground. Because what happens is that this becomes the basis of the birth of the Rosicrucian movement, which was born in the Palatinate in Germany. The it's the significance of it. You have to read Francis Yates's book, The Rosicrucian Enlightenment. It's outstanding. I mean, this is true scholarship, except it deals with the occult, and I have never seen a true scholar dealing with occult subjects. And she points out that the significance of the Rosicrucian movement was outlined in the in what's called the chemical wedding. Chemical as in alchemical or hermetic wedding.
Sure.
And this is the wedding between Frederick of the Palatinate, the German prince, and the daughter, Elizabeth, of James I. This, again, represents another, if you follow these bloodlines, you'll see that they divided 400 years before, and that they are now being reunited. And the pattern is so clear, and that this becomes now the significance of this marriage, of this reunion of these two occult bloodlines.
What do you think? What do you think the point of that is, to split them off like that and then to rejoin them again? Is that to bring in a new blood into the line for some reason, or?
I guess I don't know. I guess they are. I don't know. You know, they're just separated. So this is a recombination to enhance the power. Maybe, I don't know. But it's the pattern is so clear.
Right. Okay.
Like Diana is another one.
Spencer. Diana Spencer.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and the distance is even longer. So what happens is that the occult underground use this as a pretext. What Francis Yates exposes that they then elect Frederick as king of Bohemia. Bohemia is the Kabbalistic center of Europe at the time, and is actually really to another tangent that goes too far. Never mind. And just remember Bohemia, and which in fact the Jews, which is where the Jews received their first flag, which is a red flag with a gold symbol of the Star of David, which is then used by the House of Rothschild, which is red again. I'll return to that one. Right. So, so it centers in Bohemia. They declare Bohemia, so the Catholics declare war. It begins the 30 Years' War, and the Rosicrucian movement ends in utter failure. So they seek refuge in England, and there they found Freemasonry. There was an important point. And I lost it.
Yeah, well, okay. I mean, we're basically the overarching heading here to the what we're talking about here basically is the Palladian Rite, and we're.
So I'll come back to. Well, I'll come back to that.
Okay.
So when they established the Freemasons. So James I is succeeded by Charles I, and apparently the Freemasons are involved in a plot to execute him. He's replaced by Charles II. And he is succeeded by James II. And finally, James II is forced to abdicate. And who is he replaced by? He's replaced by the grandson of Elizabeth and Frederick, George I.
Okay.
So now finally this bloodline is reestablished over Europe, the Hanoverian dynasty, of which the queen now is descendant. Right. And I have a graphic of this family, and it's amazing how organized it is again, and can all be traced back to one person, which is George I. And you'll see that all the branches that are affiliated with this family are all the leading members of the Order of the Garter.
Ah, really?
The Order of the Garter goes back to when the Templars were forced underground in England and reemerged as the Order of the Garter. So now back to the significance of the Palladians. And the House of Rothschild. So the House of Rothschilds, I have no idea where they came from. A very interesting suggestion by Clifford Shack is that they are likely descendants of Shabbatai Zevi. Now, Shabbatai Zevi, this is another issue entirely separate.
Yeah, which is huge, very interesting, but a huge area. Yeah, continue.
All the significance is there. the modern evolution of Kabbalah begins with Isaac Luria, who created what's called a new Kabbalah. Mm-hmm. And the first important manifestation of Lurianic Kabbalah is Shabbatai Zevi, who declares, or Zvi, who declares himself Messiah in 1665, and marches to Constantinople in 1666. A very important date, obviously, and I believe wasn't missed. It was deliberate.
Right.
This rocks the Jewish world. The half of the Jewish population, and we have to kind of understand, we have to take off our modern biased lens and look at the situation how it really was. We think the Middle Ages were more backwards because they didn't have telephones, but it wasn't like that. This message spread like wildfire across, and we have to remember that the locus of civilization was not in Europe at this time; it was in the Middle East, particularly the Ottoman Empire, and there were other important locales across North Africa and Egypt and Palestine. Mm. And the Jewish diaspora was spread across these various centers, and all across them, they were swept by this wave of enthusiasm that the Messiah had arrived. That half the Jewish population of the world at the time believed in Shabbatai Zevi's claim, until he was given an ultimatum by the Sultan to choose Islam or death, and he chose Islam.
Right.
So, a very interesting point is that there was a legend in the Middle Ages about the Red Jews. It was very common amongst Jews. The Red Jews referring to the lost tribes who they believed lived in Central Asia and who were red.
Okay.
So they believed that the Messiah was going. That they always believed that the lost tribes were going to come forth with the Messiah and help the Jews conquer the world. So this was being expected. And it was also believed that the lost tribes were also descended from Edom, as the Khazars and Thessians were believed to, and Armenians were believed to be descended from Edom, explaining their red hair.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And so this is where you get the significance of the red. And there's also a very interesting book called Red Jews and Anti-Semitism. And this is a scholarly work. It's no exploration of occult history or anything like that. But explores the significance of this legend of the lost tribes amongst the Jews. Mm-hmm. So like I said, the Jews get their first red flag, and then eventually Jacob Rothschild, because the successor to Shabbatai Zevi is Jacob Frank.
Yeah, right.
And Jacob Frank, he mused about this significance of the mystery of Edom, which was considered kind of like the great secret of the Frankists. And according to Rabbi Antelman, the Rothschilds were Frankists. And that's how you get the significance. Mm. So while the Illuminati was supposedly disbanded, Jacob Frank's successor, Moses Dobruschka, who also I think went by the name of Schoenfeld, founded an organization called the Asiatic Brethren. And this Asiatic Brethren, according to Albert Pike, became the successors of the Illuminati. And the reason they called themselves Asiatic Brethren is because they were referring to the Asiatic mystics that the Templars had supposedly learned their doctrines from in the Middle East.
Okay.
In other words, the Ismailis. So this was a deliberate reference. The Asiatic Brethren were composed of Jews, Syrians, and Armenians mostly.
Okay.
So out of the Asiatic Brethren, you get offshoot organizations like the Golden Rosicrucians, which evolve into the English Rosicrucians, and what's the other word? Yes, the very important branch of Egyptian Freemasonry.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So when Napoleon, and this is, so now we all come back to terrorism.
Okay, so can we, because we need to begin to wrap things up here for this time, can we tie this back to the Palladian rite in a nice fashion here? Yeah.
So the Palladian rite was basically, connected with other offshoot rites, was basically designed to coordinate the various branches of Freemasonry, including Scottish Rite Freemasonry, as well as Egyptian Rite Freemasonry, and the other, non-formal branches of Freemasonry. And so the Preeminent Rite now has apparently developed a plan for 3 world wars, culminating in a third, which was against the Muslims. How do you create a war against Islam? You have to militize the Islamic world, or you have to create a militant branch in the Islamic world. So Lord Palmerston takes charge of this mission, along with Bulwer Lytton, head of the English Rosicrucians, and this is how they create Islamic fundamentalism, under the guise of the Muslim Brotherhood.
That is interesting. and of course, this, as you say, there's so much more to talk about in regards to the world wars, of course, but this also leads up into our modern age, of course. We can even tie in the New Age movement eventually in all of this. And what I like to do, David, is to basically do a follow-up program if you have the time for us, and we can kind of continue and continue in the chronology, if you will, of this story here, because we've really kind of just brushed the first couple of thousand years, if you will, of this, and it's it continues, as it were. But I do want to mention, though, here, for people that want to check out some of these genealogical charts that you've been talking about, David, that you can simply go to terrorism-illuminati.com, click on book, and then on the right-hand side there is a nice heading called genealogical charts, and these are really nice charts that you can take a look at that follow some of these things that you've been talking about, David, and it also shows, actually, as you say, that how these
patterns.
Yes, the patterns, and how these tie back into each other again.
Herod the Great.
Yes,
exactly.
And we can even next time, if we do another program here down the road, we can talk potentially a bit about Prince William, because that's the point to where we are right now, and that's an important point, so to speak. So
exactly.
But we don't have time for that right now. Mention your websites again, David, and we can discuss later on a follow-up program to this.
Right. 2 basic websites. The first one, the Dying God: Hidden History of Western Civilization, which follows the worship of the Dying God through history up until the creation of the Illuminati. It's at thedyinggod.com. And my second book, Terrorism and Illuminati: A 3,000 Year History, which leads off of the first book, but covers a lot of terrain that we just discussed, and especially the bloodlines and their significance leading up to terrorism, which can be found at www.terrorism-illuminati.com. Very good. And again, available in PDF on the site.
Very good, excellent. Thank you very much, David. The website again, terrorism-illuminati.com, and then thedyinggod.com. Check it out. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming on, David. We'll discuss more here a little bit later about doing a follow-up program, okay?
Excellent. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.